The America's Cup, the 12-metre years, narrated by Rob Robinson, North Haven, South Australia. 1974, the 22nd Defence. From little incidents grew a momentous history. Thus could the genesis of the 1974 challenge be described. During the Defender trials of 1970, the new Spackman and Stevens design, sail number US-24 Valiant, was having work carried out at Director's Boatyard. At the same time as work was nearing completion on his own boat at the yard, a curious Alan Bond and his designer, Bob Miller, studied the latest pedigree from the S&S stable, even climbing aboard for further inspection. Vic Romano hated Australians, more so ones that climbed over his syndicate boats. With the use of security guards, he had Bond and Miller forcibly removed. An angry Bond and even angry Romano exchanged words. Until now, Bond was not aware of the international 12-metre rule and even less aware of the America's Cup. His departing defiant words were aimed at a contemptuous Romano, in effect a threat, perhaps as it turned out a prophecy. He would build his own boat and he'd win the bloody America's Cup. Romano laughed with the familiar confident arrogance of the Wall Street elite, secure in a deep-set inner belief that his New York Yacht Club would never lose the America's Cup. They would always win, by fair means or foul. Immediately after the 1970 debacle, the New York Yacht Club received 5 challenges for 1973. This date would later be changed to 1974, which was due to another of the regular and severe economic downturns affecting the world economy, usually very illustrative occurrences for the high rollers of US stock markets. The delay would also assist designers, allowing them time to come to terms with the advent of aluminium as a building material for 12-metre yachts. It was believed at this time that the introduction of aluminium with its weight advantages would make all existing 12 metres obsolete. The summer of 1974 would prove this to be a fallacy. Until 1974, there had only ever been 2 Super 12s, boats so superior to all other designs they would influence the design of every other. Eventually there were to be 3 such designs. Number 3 was still 8 years in the future. The first Super 12 was in 1939, a commission from the great Harold Vanderbilt to a young, fertile designer who had embraced the science of tank testing and would deliver a beautiful hull fitted with a revolutionary aluminium mast, a design so advanced that she would devastate the latest and relatively large English fleet. In fact, in 12-metre design, confirmed by the reality of events in 1958 and 1964, they would never recover. The second 12, designed for the 1967 Defence, once again an Olin Stevens creation, would, like her forebear, influence all subsequent 12-metre design. Intrepid, overwhelmingly victorious in 1967, again in 1970, now in 1974, heavily revamped, deleting the Britain Charge modifications of 1970 and reverting to her 1967 format. Every part of her was refreshed, some sections more so, now battle ready for a third defence. But other defence syndicates had similar aims. Not since 1958 and 64 had there been such an enormous defence effort, and as a consequence so many new builds and rebuilds. The build programs were an acknowledged credit to the great Australian designer, Alan Payne, an object of laughter and contempt in New York Yacht Club circles, more so amongst Australia's East Coast ruling elite, yet still highly regarded by the average Australian yachtsman. He had only ever designed 2 12-metre yachts, Gretel in 62 and Gretel II in 70. But what yachts! They were the fastest 12s in the world at launch, both defeated by the fastest crews in the world in those respective years in slower boats. Alan Payne was a brilliant designer with an equally brilliant attention to detail in hull design, mast rigging and even lowly fittings, designing many fittings that all yachtsmen the world over still use today. The New York Yacht Club readily adapted all those ideas. They would never admit that they were from what they considered a second-rate designer from a second-rate nation. It was a huge admission then of Payne's ability that Olin Stevens' newest 12-metre design, US-26 Courageous, was a development of and a response to Gretel II. Ultimately, a most magnificent development. It must be stated, however, regardless of how much the New York Yacht Club despised Alan Payne, Olin Stevens, that most honest of men, with a high sense of duty and integrity, qualities now despised in the millennium by the Microsoft generation, but nevertheless valued by those who had lived through a devastating world economic depression and an equally devastating world war only 20 years after the war to end all wars. The other serious contender for 1974's defence was to be the ultimate radical 12 design from Britain Charts. Pushing meter yacht design into aggressive new areas and the product of many hours of tank testing, combined with the recently developed NASA computer technology, Charts had designed a breakthrough 12, a boat so advanced it would be 2% faster than all known existing designs, featuring an underwater truncated or cut-off transom known as a fastback and a radical underwater entry, the bow bustle, thereby reducing wet to surface, should be the ultimate extension of any 1970s campaign must-have feature, the bustle, described by many as the look of a pregnant whale. A design feature advanced even further by chance, and now after the valiant fiasco of 1970, discarded by Spackman and Stevens in the New Courageous. Chance's new radical design in an aluminium hull painted bright red, she was proudly launched and named Mariner, sail number US 25. Supporting the Mariner effort was Valiant, now also like Intrepid before her, modified and designed by Brett and Chance. However, ironically now totally rebuilt, discarding the 1970 original and incorporating the latest Chance advancements, hence lost as a benchmark of the current design reality. The 5 challenges of 1970 would be reduced to just 2. Baron Bick returned bravely with France, recovering from his own debacle with Paul Elvstrom and the Danes who had attempted an all-Danish 12-metre challenge with French money. Redesigned by André Mauric, the original 1970 France, a design heavily influenced by Chance Egger, another 1970s Britain Chance design. Admittedly, France was still a competitive hull. Let down in 1970 by poor crew morale, the Baron had made the same mistakes of Sir Frank Packer and the British before him, and Alan Bond in 1974 alongside him. Their Imperial Lordships, the British, were never to learn in 1958 and 1964. Packer wouldn't in 62 and 1970. Vic should have learned in 70 and Bond would actually learn in 74. To be successful, a crew must be decided upon well in advance and allowed to develop and fully learn about their boat and its many sails, as was the way with all the New York Yacht Club defenders. American defenders were run by small, tight syndicates of experts in all aspects of boat performance, very much like a successful corporation. Challengers, however, were still run by Ogliarchs, who had studied Mein Kampf in depth. It would not be until 1983 that a challenger or challengers would get the formula to success correct. At face level, the 1974 challenge was not significant, yet in reality it was, immensely so. This was to be the last defence helmed by an original first-generation skipper, the magnificent Ted Hood, still the America's Cup defence sailmaker, a 12-metre and a production yacht designer, and a Great 12 skipper. 2 new generation skippers would emerge to defend the next 2 challenges. One, an old-style wealthy amateur in the Harold Vanderbilt mould, the other the ultimate professional, as per the current sad excuse for America's Cup, and much like the British 12 skippers and crews sailing against the steamroller Vim in 1939. Ted Turner, the irascible yet lovable southerner, who had perhaps more miles sailed on a 64 defence contender than any other 12 helmsman in history, a boat whose very name exudes American glory, the boat, American Eagle. An innovator Luders design, winner of the Sydney-Hobart race, the Southern Ocean Racing Circuit, the Newport race and the Fastnet. Now hungry to prove himself, Turner would helm with another new but immensely accredited yachtsman as tactician and starting helmsman, winner of the Congressional Cup, and who in 1974, 80 and 83 put the fear of God into a godless Alan Bond. Dennis Conner. Mariner would be the 3rd breakthrough 12 in history. Vim in 39, Intrepid in 67, and now in 74, Mariner. The New York Yacht Club's first observation trials commenced in June 74. In her first race, Mariner easily defeated her teammate Valiant. A confident syndicate's expectations were high. In the second race, Mariner would start against Intrepid, a now 7-year-old revamped design, sailed by very accomplished Jerry Driscoll. Not only helming her, but also having rebuilt her in such a way that she ultimately weighed less than the new aluminium cropper boats. Intrepid also featured another secret weapon, North sails. Until now, Hood were always the secret predominant weapon in defence sails. This defence would feature not only Mariner against Intrepid, against Courageous, but North versus Hood, a reflection of what was happening to the business worldwide. Much was at stake. The America's Cup was becoming big business in its own right, regardless of international and Wall Street games. Part 2. Against the backdrop and drama of the defence trials, the challengers were having their very own dramas. As always in an America's Cup summer, there were subplots and bitter disappointments, in most cases after the Cup races had long finished, forgotten and eventually to be ignored by history. Some, however, would remain forever. Bond 74 was loud, brash, obnoxious and self-promoting. He would make many enemies, most lifelong to his early death. Many Americans, many Australian. Some, like Vic Romana, would ultimately in 83 come back to haunt him with a vengeance. As Bond saw things, the whole point of his challenge was to promote his real estate development, Yanchep Sun City, and he promoted it to the max. much to the chagrin of the official challenging club, Royal Perth Yacht Club. And of course there was no love lost between Bond and Royal Perth Yacht Club. Bond was working class, a sign rider who made good. Royal Perth Yacht Club was comprised of old money, very old money. People merely had to be born, then to live their whole lives in excess and luxury. In fact, very much like many members of the New York Yacht Club. They detested people who had been tradesmen and were self-made. They had rejected Bond's application for membership several times prior to '74. Suddenly, after challenging for the America's Cup, he was deemed acceptable. But only just, provided he behaved. Bond never complied with others' expectations. Like Romana, the Royal Perth Yacht Club would extract its revenge against Bond, but that would be way off in the future in 1987. The yachting press, the British in particular, bitter about their own country's persistent cup failures, took great pleasure in baiting Bond and setting him up to make gaffes all summer. Bond did one thing right though, his choice of Southern Cross's final skipper. Initially John Cuneo with Jim Hardy as tactician. Cuneo, a proven successful skipper in other classes of yachts, had trouble integrating himself into the crew of 12 and displaying the leadership needed for the task ahead. Hardy, already proven in battle as the skipper of Gretel II in 1970, was given the top job. Bond had earlier rejected him as skipper for the campaign for the same reason he rejected Alan Payne as a designer. They were tainted with defeat on Gretel II. Bond despised losers. Hardy, however, and without dispute, was and still is the greatest Challenger skipper in a 12 in history. No one has ever surpassed his call under pressure, his ability to lead and bond his crew, no pun intended, and finally his pure ability in bonding with his charge and discovering its true potential. There were and would be challenging skippers who could handle a 12. There were challenging skippers who could extract the best from the crew, and there were challenging skippers who could bounce back from adversity and take more the next race. Only Hardy could do all of that and more. Thursday, August 22nd, 1974. To be the official challengers of the 22nd Defence, Australia with Southern Cross had to defeat the French with France in a best-of-7 series. The day had come for the first race to commence. 9 miles southwest of Newport lay the US Navy torpedo range at Buoy A. This would be the start line for the first race. Visibility was hazy with a light wind of 5 to 8 knots, initially east-northeast, progressively swinging to the southeast. All the hype of the new Great Southern Cross was about to be tested against the 5-year-old France, a boat much improved in sails and performance since 1970. Milling and manoeuvring before the start, Hardy forces Jean-Marie Gillot to jibe and then take control to get into a leading position above France. Tacking for clear air, France never recovers, losing the race by 7 minutes in a fading breeze and finishing just inside the 5.5-hour time limit. Adding drama to a most undramatic race, a helicopter chartered by CBS News crashed into the sea in the middle of the spectator fleet. The Australian tender, offsider, and vigilant US Coast Guard crews raced to rescue the crew of the helicopter. Sadly, a CBS technician, Robert Otto, died. Later, the Australians would be severely criticised and censored by the New York Yacht Club for their involvement in the rescue. Apparently, it was not deemed as acceptable behaviour. August 23, weather again hazy at the start with later rain, winds light and variable. Like the first race, this was claimed to be France's ideal conditions. A more confident and aggressive Gillot wins the start. Southern Cross improves the position on the first windward leg. Inexplicably, France tacks following Southern Cross to take the lead. At times in the light breeze, France shows superior speed, but makes several tactical errors to negate it. The French have the ability to win, but a lack of hard tactical and trim experience is costing them boat speed. Southern Cross defeats France by 3 minutes 37 seconds. August 24th, the third Challengers race. Visibility again hazy with a dense fog to follow. Breeze southwesterly 12 to 15 knots. Both skippers, becoming more confident, display much more aggressive starting manoeuvres. After blowing her spinnaker in the increasingly deep fog, Southern Cross rounds the mark off the second reach to be alongside an equally fast France. Neither has advantage. The race is cancelled due to the fog. The French crew come away from the cancelled race with much improved confidence. August 25th, the resale of the third race. Weather clear with a thin haze. Breeze east-northeasterly, 4 to 5 knots. In shifting winds, Southern Cross takes a commanding lead. France showing at times exceptional speed gains on Southern Cross, but does not quite take the lead. After 5.5 hours, the race time limit expires. The third race will be started for a third time. Again, the French have good reason to feel more confident. August 26th, third race, third resale. Weather clear with distant haze, breeze southeasterly, 10 to 14 knots. An aggressive Jean-Marie Gilloux wins the start. Gentleman Jim, far more conservative in stance, confident that his boat has greater overall speed around the standard Olympic course. France loses by 6 minutes 59 seconds. The Series 3-0 Southern Cross Way. France calls a lay day. On August 28th, in a southwesterly of 10 to 12 knots, France again wins the start. Again, she loses the race by a smaller 4 minutes 22 second margin. Bruno Bick feels that France was much improved over 1970. Certainly, Jean-Marie Gilloux had been a great skipper and showed enormous talent. The Australians could only hope the boat was faster. Certainly, the second and even the first of 1970 French efforts were better than the British performances so far. Baron Bick and his son Bruno gallantly offers France and her crew as a training partner to help sharpen the Australians for the challenge ahead. Bruno Bick declares at the press conference, "I think that they are the best prepared challengers that I've seen, and they have a real chance for the Cup." Alan Bond caused stirred a lot of noise in some of the press conferences when he held up proceedings and refused to be involved until the Rolex signage and clock was removed from the dais wall. Apparently Bond had a rival sponsor. Again, the English press had a feeding frenzy. As the challengers leisurely completed their selection trials, the New York Yacht Club went about its defence selection. Unlike the challengers selection, which was a knockout best-of-7 series emulating the Cup itself, the New York Yacht Club held partial races, concentrating on starts and building up teamwork and boat skills. Trial races usually went for over 2 to 3 marks, i.e. not a full course as in the actual Cup. It was effective, but it had its failings. It never allowed a losing boat the opportunity to complete a full race and learn to overcome adversity and mistakes. The much-hyped and anticipated Battle of the Summer was expected to be between the Radical Breakthrough 12 Mariner and Spackman Stevens Courageous, with the old wooden Intrepid waiting in the wings. Valiant was not considered a serious effort, merely there to make up numbers and assist in training the Mariner crew. The selection races for the 1974 America's Cup Defender would be perhaps the most exciting and intense since 1958. And like any good old-fashioned movie script, there were heroes, bullies and underdogs. The preliminary trial races commenced at 12:30 on Monday, June the 24th. Wind 8 knots at start, increasing to 18-20 knots at the finish line. First start, Courageous and Intrepid. A wildly anticipated Courageous defeated Intrepid, but not as convincingly as expected, the difference only 13 seconds. Second start, 5 minutes after, at 12:35, was Mariner against her teammate Valiant. Mariner wins easily by 1 minute 53 seconds. The race committee had decided to squeeze in one more race on the day, starting at 3:25 in the afternoon. Mariner would race against the old wooden Intrepid. A battle between two West Coast skippers, the loud, confident Ted Turner against the quiet, experienced and immensely talented Jerry Driscoll. The breeze at the start was 14 knots, at the finish 18 knots. Mariner's weather. Tactician on Mariner was a tough, ruthless San Diego yachtsman named Dennis Conner. His first time in the big league of the America's Cup. Mariner wins the start easily, both ahead and high to windward. Mariner was now on her way to dominating the 1974 America's Cup. Her designer, the greatest 12-metre designer of the 70s, you only had to ask him, Britton Chance. The CBS television network commissioned a movie of the Cup for that year, The Grandest Prize. It would provide perhaps one of the greatest moments in America's Cup history. Only 200 metres up the first leg, Conner looks over to Intrepid and reports to Turner. A little higher and about the same speed. He repeats it again. A little higher and about the same speed. Only seconds later, a few seconds later, he reports again. He's getting us. He's getting us. Getting to us slightly, he reports again. A little higher and a little faster. Turner, visibly now upset, draws back. Higher and faster? Minutes later, Intrepid, gaining rapidly, draws a retort from Turner, actually more a plea for reassurance. It's not dangerous yet. You can tell me it's not dangerous. Conner answers, oh, it's not dangerous. Later on the leg, Turner exclaims, we're going at 8.4. That's the best we've done. Isn't that polar plot? More seconds later, Connor reports again. They're still going higher and faster. After a few more comments from both, Turner makes one of the great comments of 1974. Shoo, it's going to be a long summer. A polar plot is designed as calculated hull speed and a given wind. Mariner is exceeding that and Intrepid was powering past her. Mariner loses the race by 2 minutes 52. No operatic tragedy could exceed this piece of yachtsman theatre. The blame game begins. Syndicate head Hinman and Turner blame the design of Britton Chance. Britton Chance blames Turner for poor helmsmanship and claims Turner has no feeling for Mariner's unique abilities. Mariner would lose all her next races except when sailing against Valiant. Mariner was not the anticipated breakthrough boat. The cut-off blunt transom was not the true rule beater as the tank promised. When being rebuked for his perceived lack of ability by Britton Chance, Turner bounced back with another of his famous 1974 retorts. Britt, do you know why there are no fish with square tails? Because all the pointed tail fish caught them and ate them. Turner walks up and then turns back to Britton Chance. Even shit's pointed at both ends. Mariner returned to the builder's yard and Chance's Mark II transom design begins. Turner even paid for a plane to drag a banner across Newport during the day. Mariner will return. Mariner did return for the third group of trials, but she need not bother. Mariner was still a disaster. But the selection trials were not all bad. The superboat of 1974 wasn't Mariner. It wasn't even the newest 12 Courageous. It was the magnificent combination of Intrepid, Jerry Driscoll and crew. This was Intrepid's third America's Cup and she didn't disappoint. It was a classic underdog versus the town bully story. Intrepid, the 7-year-old wooden 12, campaigning on a tight, restricted budget, most of the maintenance and repair work done each day by a racing crew, challenging the new sweetheart of aluminium, with an unlimited budget, crew and assisting support cast of hundreds. The little yacht that could won as many as she lost. So intense, so close was the racing that the committee could not make a choice until Courageous won the very last race on September 2. The America's Cup commenced on September 10. History was to prove in 1977 that Intrepid should have been the true defender. The 1974 America's Cup challenger would be Southern Cross of Australia. The defender would be Courageous of the USA. The contenders prepared. The clock was ticking, not just for 1974, but for the America's Cup. As a side note, Dennis Conner was enlisted to crew on Courageous. He would be starting helmsman. So concerned was Alan Bond that he lodged a protest. Bond could always spot a long-term threat. Part 3. Newport, Rhode Island in the summer of 1974 was going through an enormous transition period. As one of the oldest colonies in the United States of the Americas, it had always been a navy town, with all the sleaze and vice that that inevitably entailed. As a contrast, Newport had always been simultaneously the holiday village of choice for the mega-rich and famous elite. By 1974, the US Navy was gone, never to return. Nixon had closed the port after the voters went Democrat. Somehow the decision to reinvent Newport would prove to be fortuitous for the town fathers who wisely decided that Newport should become a historic tourist port. Utilising Yankee know-how and can-do, the wharf front and adjoining streets would see buildings demolished and others intact transported whole to the water's edge. The Australian sailors of 62 and 67 would not recognise the changes. The Cameo Bar, renamed in 62 the Royal Cameo Bar, was long gone. The candy store moved en masse to the water's edge to become the cool America's Cup place to be seen. Newport 74 had become not only the world's ultimate sailors' hangout in which to be seen, but also to party and enjoy amongst fellow brethren. Strangely, it was and always would be, long before trendy global warming concepts, the only place for most yachties where it was quicker to walk or ride a bike than drive a car. In an America's Cup summer, it was not just the 12s on display. Most of the United States' greatest historic restored yachts and powered motorboats would be out cruising and on view, to be openly celebrated like a reality maritime museum, enjoying the New York Yacht Club cruises and social events. In 1974, at the time of the America's Cup, the top-selling record, or single song in the USA, was I Shot the Sheriff by Eric Clapton. Godfather 2 was the year's most popular movie, and the hottest new TV show was Happy Days, featuring a young Ron Howard. Only days earlier, Richard Nixon, under the duress of impeachment, resigned, closing the Watergate saga. USA Motor Trend's Car of the Year was the Ford Mustang II. In 1974 was also the year of that must-have item, the Pet Rock. September 10. Finally, after possibly the most intense defence trials ever seen, on Tuesday, September 10, 1974, 2:10 p.m, Newport time, racing commenced. Finally, journalistic hype would be tested by reality. Wind at the start was 11 knots, dropping to 7 knots at the finish. The start is always a good indicator of an America's Cup Series. It would reveal the timidity or aggression of a challenging skipper, manoeuvrability and handling of both yachts, and boat speed. For the spectator, it was also the most possibly only exciting part of the actual race. Courageous greedily grabbed the eagerly sought windward position over Southern Cross. Just before crossing the line, Southern Cross tacks. It looks even. Perhaps Courageous has the lead, but it's minute. To the first mark, it's hard to declare a consistent leader. The racing is close. The race is cloaked in a light Newport fog. Fatally, Jim Hardy overshoots the mark, giving away her winning advantage, and allows Courageous to cross the mark 5 boat lengths ahead. Hood is magnificent in these conditions, almost willing Courageous forward and into the lead, squeezing every lift, pinching to windward at every small wave. The intense defence trials are now showing to advantage. Hood, battle-hardened by months of racing and fully conversant with every sail, every characteristic of his boat. The rest of the race is pure textbook match racing, with Courageous maintaining a loose cover and concentrating on boat speed. She crosses the line ahead of Southern Cross by 4 minutes and 54 seconds. Just after the race, a journalist asked Jim Hardy how he felt, how he slept after his defeat. Like a baby, promptly responded Jim. I woke up every 2 hours and cried. The wind divided commentators. Some considered the challenger from down under a non-threat, others not so sure. At times, Southern Cross displays remarkable boat speed, only inept handling holding her back. The second race will commence 2 days later, September 11, and no start due to heavy fog over the course and a lack of wind. September 12. Visibility, or lack of, is again a threat to starting the race. Visibility over the course is approximately 1 mile at midday. Course signals are set. The race commences at 12:10. Pre-race manoeuvres show similar tactics to race 1, with both boats heading towards the port end of the line, into an exclusive fleet of 18 boats, all Wall Street's elite on their floating displays of wealth. Each competing crew hoping to wash off and negate any advantage to the other in this confused mass of spectators. Unlike the first day, the Coast Guard issued orders that all spectator boats must maintain station and not move. Both yachts were on starboard tack, only separating the go opposite sides of a large spectator yacht. Jim Hardy on Southern Cross tacked to port. Courageous maintained her course. Courageous had right of way under the race rules. Hardy, realising that there was not enough room to clear Courageous, tacks again. Hardy does not complete the tack, holding Southern Cross high into the wind, almost in a luff position. Ted Hood, the vastly experienced race skipper on Courageous, was forced to luff to avoid collision. Southern Cross has infringed on Rule 36, a port tack yacht shall stay clear of a starboard tack yacht, and Rule 41 regarding tacking and jibing. Both yachts launched protest flags. The protest committee would later disallow both protests on technicalities. Courageous maintains a loose cover over Southern Cross. Her boat speed, or superior boat speed in fact, becoming obvious. Halfway up the windward mark, Southern Cross tacks to get ahead of Courageous. It's an exciting moment and so far a dull procession. But Hardy blunders, breaking the number 1 rule of match racing by not maintaining a close tack for tack cover. Courageous tacks away. Southern Cross maintains course, not tacking to cover. When they come together further along the course, Hood is in the lead by 34 seconds. Again, like every other preceding challenger, the American defender appears superior, sharpened by months of ruthless match racing in the selection trials. The race takes on the characteristic Cup scenario of an American-led procession. In 15 knots of wind, Courageous wins by a close 1 minute 11 seconds. Southern Cross has lost again. Their shitted times show potential. Courageous has greater speed to windward and tacks faster, hence Hardy's reluctance to cover Courageous tack for tack when in a commanding position. Southern Cross shows blistering speed off-wind, particularly on reaches, like many of Bob Miller's designs. But the old maxim of yachting stands irrefutably true. A fast windward boat will always beat a fast off-wind boat, especially on an Olympic triangle course. Olin Stevens, unlike Bob Miller, specialises in fast windward boats. September 14. Race 3 was postponed for September 13 due to heavy fog on the course. Starting in 12 knots of wind from the northwest, Southern Cross delights spectators by beating Courageous over the line by 8 seconds. Unlike 1970, Hardy's starting confidence is high. Inexorably, Courageous climbs higher to windward than Southern Cross. Slowing from the backwind of Courageous, Hardy tacks. In a fluky breeze, Southern Cross gets a lift, but fails to tack on Courageous and loses the lead advantage. The poor race tactics on Southern Cross are becoming a cause of upset for the Challenge Syndicate head, Alan Bond. The Wonder Boat from Down Under is not quite as advertised. The race is eventually abandoned from lack of wind, but it showcases much of what is wrong with Southern Cross. Her crew lack confidence and skill, her keel design, smaller than Courageous, is less efficient to windward, especially when heeled. Southern Cross requests a lay day. Racing will commence on the 16th. During the lay day, Southern Cross is hauled out of the water and cleaned, her radical, articulated rudder replaced by a more conventional one. September 16. Race 3 commences for a second time on September 16. The wind is 8 knots from the west. Both yachts are over the line early, causing the race committees to announce a recall and to do a restart. The second start commences in a now 12 knots of breeze. Courageous wins the start and stays in the commanding position for the whole race, eventually winning by 5 minutes 27 seconds. The English yachting press are in an excited frenzy. Their number one enemy at each press conference has been Alan Bond. They hate him with as much blind vitriol and venom as Nancy Pelosi hates President Trump. Admittedly, Bond's games of upmanship, or perhaps more accurately just old-fashioned salesmanship, are at times brash and irritating. Or is it that the English are more upset that the Australians are consistently better at the America's Cup than they are? The Australian loss of over 5 minutes has them excitedly quoting Scepter and Sovereign, the previous English challengers. The reality is that a 5-minute loss for either would have been considered close to a victory. So dismal has been both challenges. Southern Cross is now 3 down in the best of 7 series. Both boats indicate their willingness to race the following day, September 17. The race is to start at 12:10 and a southwesterly of 12 knots. Courageous with Connor at the helm wins the start by a healthy 20 seconds. In a crushing defeat, leads at every mark, displaying great boat speed and better pointing abilities, at no time close to being challenged. It's a procession, like so many before in the America's Cup. She crosses the line 7 minutes 19 seconds ahead. If the English were in a frenzy the day before, they are now ecstatic, popping many bottles of French champagne, free, courtesy of Baron Bick of course. They are English. Why pay when you can freeload whilst criticising others? Much prose and so many trees are sacrificed to ensure the printing of the stupidity of both Bob Miller and Alan Bond, and the theoretical superiority of any potential English future challenge. So after so much rhetoric, hype and exaggerated claims, the great wonder boat from Down Under was suitably smote by Ted Hood and Courageous. The inevitable after-challenge diagnosis commences fairly early. After the events and competitiveness of 1970, the Southern Cross Challenge was admittedly disappointing. Bond had spent over 3 million Aussie dollars at a time when one Aussie dollar was worth $1.20 US, i.e. he could have easily have financed and campaigned 3, possibly 4 US defenders. While Southern Cross was disappointing, she was not as uncompetitive as the previous English efforts, Scepter and Sovereign. Sovereign so bad that she lost one race by over 14 minutes. Nor was she a dog like Dame Paddy, the sailing tragedy, no disgrace, by Australian standards, that was the 1967 Australian sailing joke. Dame Paddy was so bad that any 1958 US 12 could have easily defeated her, let alone Intrepid, the second Super 12 from Olin Stevens. It was later revealed by Jim Hardy that Gretel 2 was given no new sails and never had her bottom cleaned to ensure Southern Cross's superiority. always a guaranteed tactic to ensure victory. But the what-ifs are outstanding. If Gretel too had been given a sharp crew, new sails and important maintenance, who knows what the results may have been. Better still, what if Alan Payne, at the top of his profession in '70, had been given a good budget to design and build a new aluminium 12 in competition with Bob Miller's effort? All three theoretical boats with good crews and sails would have created the intensity so far lacking, but essential to ensure top-notch training and competitiveness for any Australian challenge. Especially in the context that courageous was Olin Stevens' interpretation of Gretel 2 in aluminium. But ultimately Alan Bond was on a learning curve, and learn he did. For the honour and glory of his beloved France, Baron Bick would return. For the honour and glory of his beloved Alan Bond would return. 3 Americans would also come away from the '74 challenge with differing plans. Ted Hood decided he needed an aluminium Intrepid to defend again. Ted Turner wanted courageous, correctly assessing that the big breakthroughs would be in sails and rig. Dennis Connor wanted the permanent professional defence campaign, never stopping from training in the intervening years, using incremental and improved new courageous design. The bogeyman was the test tank. Whoever could tame it and deduce the correct answers would create the next breakthrough. Those who deduced wrong would have another Mariner. If you like this podcast, please follow and check out my podcast on the World Sports Car Championship 1953 to 1962. And please feel free to donate to my PayPal account, maritimerob@gmail.com. There will be more chapters of the 12 Metre America's Cup forthcoming. Goodbye, and thank you for your listening.